Mom called just to invite me to a quick dinner with family, but when I walked into the restaurant, she pointed to the back and said, "Your table is over there." I paused, still holding my purse strap, unsure if I'd misheard her. The waiter standing beside me shifted uncomfortably as if awaiting confirmation before guiding me. My eyes darted to the main table, the one near the center of the warm, candlelit Italian bistro. There they were, my parents, my sister Brittany, and a few other relatives and faces I vaguely recognized from old Christmas cards. Laughing, leaning close, sharing a bottle of wine, together. I turned and followed the direction of her finger. Tucked in a dim corner near the restroom sat a small two-person table. One side was already set, the other bare. It looked like a spot for walk-ins or overflow, certainly not somewhere you'd expect family to be seated. As I sat, the waiter approached and gave me a tight smile. "Will you be dining alone tonight?" I looked up, startled. "I'm with the Whitmore party," I said, nodding toward the glowing center table. He followed my gaze, then hesitated. "Oh, my apologies. They didn't mention anyone else." "Of course they didn't," I murmured. I reached for the menu out of habit, but my hands trembled slightly. I kept my gaze low, pretending to read, trying not to let my shoulders slump. It wasn't anger, at least not yet. It was something colder, denser, like a quiet grief I hadn't named until this moment. I'd always thought my family was distant, formal, but this was a quiet exile. The clinking of glasses and peals of laughter drifted over like perfume. I watched Brittany stand radiant in a fitted emerald dress. She'd always known how to command attention. Her voice, bright and full of gratitude, rang out, "I just want to take a moment to thank everyone here tonight. Your support has meant everything during the expansion." There were cheers, followed by someone, probably Uncle Rick, yelling, "To Brittany's empire." My mother smiled with a pride I hadn't seen on her face in years. My father nodded, still silent, his eyes locked on the wineglass in his hand. The toast went around, glasses raised. I hadn't been offered one. No one even glanced my way. I couldn't help it. I rose slowly, menu forgotten. I walked a few steps forward just until I was barely in their line of sight. My mother noticed. Her expression didn't change. Claire Brittany spotted me. "Oh, you made it. I thought you might be caught up with whatever it is you do now." I froze. She didn't mean it as a joke. It wasn't even cruelty, it was dismissal, like she'd already decided I wasn't relevant to tonight's purpose. I gave a polite nod and returned to my table. A passing server offered me water. "You waiting for someone?" she asked kindly. "No," I said. "They're right over there." I gestured toward the celebration. The server followed my motion, looked confused for a moment, then gave a curt nod and disappeared. The meal began. Plates of antipasto and steaming pasta dishes flowed effortlessly to the main table. My father laughed an unfamiliar sound. Brittany leaned over to whisper something to my mother, who laughed harder. The distance between their table and mine wasn't more than 30 feet, but it felt like a country I hadn't been permitted to re-enter. Then Brittany stood again. "I want to especially thank Mom and Dad," she said, her eyes glistening. "This business wouldn't have grown without your unwavering faith in me." Another wave of applause. Her voice didn't crack once. No one mentioned me, not as a sister, not even as a guest. My fork stilled halfway to my mouth. The silence at my table was more deafening than the celebration across the room. I realized something I hadn't dared to say aloud, not even to myself. They hadn't simply forgotten me. They'd erased me. I looked toward the main table again, eyes scanning each face. Brittany's glowing smile, my father's averted gaze, and then my mother. Her eyes met mine. There was nothing in them. No warmth. No apology. Just a blank, polished surface like a locked window. Claire looked at the dinner table, then at her mother, and realized her eyes were completely blank. Cold. As if to say, "You're not one of us anymore." I thought it was just a misunderstanding, but when I checked the old company account, I nearly dropped my phone. The screen was still glowing against the dim backdrop of my apartment. The only light came from the laptop and a half-finished cup of herbal tea that had long gone cold. I'd promised myself I wouldn't go digging tonight. It was supposed to be a quiet evening. But after that dinner, I couldn't sit still. Brittany's words echoed in my memory, so casually cruel at the time I hadn't even processed them. You should take a break for a while. I'd assumed it meant temporary, a sabbatical, a pause, not an end. But when I typed in my old login credentials, the system spat back a single sterile message: access denied. This account is no longer active. I blinked. I tried a different route using the direct link to the accounting dashboard, a page I'd built myself years ago. This time I got in, but what I saw didn't make sense. The list of executive accounts once bearing my name alongside Brittany's and our father's now showed just two. Claire Whitmore, absent. Not inactive, not archived, just gone. I leaned closer, heart pounding, the glow of the laptop casting sharp shadows on the walls. I navigated to the shareholder breakdown, a section I'd updated quarterly like clockwork for 7 years. I still remembered the last line I'd entered: my 15% share earned through sweat and more sacrifices than I'd care to admit. Now it read 15%. Whitmore Family Trust, designated B. Whitmore M. Whitmore. I sat back, breath caught in my throat. My name wasn't anywhere in the legal documentation section. Not under founders, not under contributors, not even under historic team members. It was as though I'd never existed. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just sat there, the cursor blinking in the corner of the screen like a silent metronome mocking me with its steadiness. I picked up the phone and called Ronald Barrow, our family's longtime corporate attorney, the man who'd once toasted me with champagne after I signed the founding documents. It rang twice. "Claire," he answered. The tone was neutral, clipped. "I need to review the transfer documents for my stake," I said. Skipping pleasantries. There was a long pause. "Claire, I can't help you with that anymore. I'm no longer authorized to speak on your behalf. In fact, I'm not sure I should even be taking this call." "You're serious?" My voice was low now. "I suggest you speak with Brittany. Good night." The line went dead. I stared at the phone, more stunned than angry. The betrayal wasn't in what was said. It was in what wasn't. The absence of outrage, of protest, of any sign he'd ever cared. I turned back to the laptop. My fingers moved slowly, deliberately, and I opened a blank note on my desktop. I typed one sentence. They erased me from history. There it was. The truth laid bare in 6 words. I wasn't just pushed out, I'd been rewritten. The company we built, my company, was now a monument to Brittany's ambition. My share, my name, my legacy swallowed by a clause in a document I'd never seen. How could they do this? My own family. I reopened the financial transfer logs, scanning the metadata for signatures and timestamps. And then I saw it. The date of transfer, April 12th. The same day, Brittany sat across from me in her office, hands folded, eyes full of fake sympathy, and said, "Claire, you need a rest." She hadn't given me a break. She'd taken everything. I pushed the laptop away and stood up, suddenly breathless. The air in the apartment felt thinner, tighter, like the walls were folding in. I walked to the window and looked out into the stillness of the city. The traffic lights blinked indifferently, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel numb. I felt fury blooming quietly in my gut. This wasn't incompetence. This was coordinated. My phone buzzed on the table. A new message. Unknown number. "If you're ready to fight, I can get you the data." It wasn't spam. She sent me a map to a virtual drive containing accounting records and a warning: "Don't trust anyone in your family." I stared at the message, heart thudding. The link pulsed beneath her signature like a dare. A second message followed with a GPS pin corner of Monroe and 8th 9 a.m. the next day. A small cafe I vaguely remembered for its stiff espresso and terrible lighting. Now I was here, alone. The place was nearly empty except for a college student with headphones and an elderly man reading the Wall Street Journal. I chose a seat near the back next to a crooked lamp and a smeared window. I hadn't touched my coffee. The foam had collapsed. I didn't care. A few minutes past 9, a woman slipped into the seat across from me. Early 30s dark blazer hair pulled into a no-nonsense bun. Sharp eyes. She looked exactly how I remembered, but older, more angular. She offered a cautious smile. "Elena," I said. "Claire." Her voice was steady, but her fingers trembled slightly as she opened her laptop. "Before we start, you should know I don't do this lightly," I figured. "Most people don't commit career suicide for fun." She smirked. "Touché." We didn't talk more than that. She turned the laptop so I could see the screen. A folder labeled Sage Mirror Internal Archive blinked open. Rows of spreadsheets appeared. Audit trails, timestamp logs, name changes. I didn't have to read long before the bile rose in my throat. "You weren't removed last month," she said quietly. "They started restructuring you out over a year ago." My eyes narrowed. "A year?" She nodded. "Internal planning memos, retroactive changes to board minutes, staged performance evaluations that never happened. All coordinated between Margaret and Brittany." I gripped the edge of the table, knuckles whitening. "Why are you showing me this?" She hesitated. Then, "You may not remember, but 8 years ago when I got into Michigan on scholarship, some people in the family said I shouldn't use the Whitmore name, that I was just a half-sister nobody wanted. You stood up for me. You told Margaret to her face that I had every right to be there. I remember I said, surprised that I did. You cried in the hallway. And you stayed until I stopped." Her voice cracked slightly, but she recovered fast. "This is me returning the favor. Quietly. Before they cut me out too." I turned back to the screen. A flagged email from Margaret jumped out. "Ensure Claire's name is excluded from all future documentation. She cannot be allowed to influence asset division." I didn't breathe for several seconds. She said that I whispered. Elena nodded. "And that's not all." She pulled up a PDF, an early draft of an updated family will. "They're preparing a new estate structure. From what I've seen, you're not on it." The word disinherited hung in the air without being spoken. I sat still, staring at nothing. The noise in the cafe faded. The hum of the fridge, the clink of silverware, they blurred. The betrayal wasn't new, but it was growing teeth now. Sharp ones. My mother wasn't just indifferent. She was strategic. "And your father?" I asked carefully. "Does Ronald know I think he's playing neutral?" Elena said. "He signs what Margaret gives him. I don't think he reads anymore. Figures." I looked at her. "Why risk helping me? You still work there." "Not for long," she said. "Brittany's pushing me out quietly. I saw the draft termination notice 2 days ago." "Because you accessed this. Because I'm related to you," she said simply. The weight of it settled over me. Family didn't mean what I thought it did. Not anymore. Maybe it never had. I leaned in. "You said you had backups?" She nodded. "Encrypted. Copies of everything. Metadata access logs, even Margaret's handwritten notes she still scribbles on legal pads. I scanned them when she left her desk unattended." That was when it became real. Not just pain, not just loss, but leverage. "What do you want in return?" I asked. "Nothing yet. But when this goes public, I want a clean name. No mess. No mudslinging. Fair." She looked at me. "So what now?" I met her eyes. "Are you willing to help me flip this board?" Elena nodded once without hesitation. "If you're ready to go all the way." I didn't want to fight, but they made me become someone they never imagined I could be. The whiteboard in my apartment had turned into a battlefield. Sticky notes in neon colors marked dates and names. Arrows looped around scanned legal documents, snippets from board meeting transcripts, screenshots of financial transfers. In the center, underlined 3 times in red 2511, Partnership Gala. I stepped back and looked at the room. My quiet little home had transformed into something between a war room and a crime scene. My couch was covered in folders. The floor bore coffee mugs and balled-up printouts. A hard drive whirred softly on my desk. Every morning now started with a to-do list and ended with a new layer of betrayal. Elena was sitting cross-legged on the floor laptop balanced on her knees. She booked the ballroom at Langford Towers, she said, eyes fixed on the screen. Full guest list. About 70 attendees, investors, press, a few politicians. Margaret's using it to showcase Brittany's expansion into the wellness sector. So they're putting the whole family name on display, I said. Minus you. I nodded slowly. That's where it happens, I said. You're sure she made the game public? I'll return the favor. We worked in silence for another hour. Elena set up a shell email account tied to an unused IT alias. It would look like an accidental internal send, something tech people do all the time. Just a mistimed auto-forward. It'll attach automatically to the welcome slides, if timed right, she said. We'll label it as an archived media file. Once it runs, it'll be too late to stop. I picked up a Sharpie and wrote the file name in block letters. Legacy-reveal.pdf. The words looked crude, but I didn't care. It wasn't art. It was ammunition. While Elena fine-tuned the automation scripts, I combed through a folder of old audio backups I had saved years ago from executive meetings back when I was still family. Some were boring, others were infuriating, but one stopped me cold. It was barely 2 minutes long. The static cleared and I heard my father's voice. Low, strained. Margaret, you can't just erase her. She built this too. Her reply came sharp, precise, like a knife sliding into butter. If you object, I'll bring up Catalina. You want that scandal resurfacing? You want your bastards crawling out at your funeral. Silence. And then, my father's voice again. Broken. I'll sign. My hands were shaking as I hit rewind. I listened again. And again. I remembered Catalina vaguely, my mother's name for that Spanish waitress she always hated. So it wasn't just jealousy. There had been something real behind it. Something she stored, weaponized, and eventually used. So Ronald chose silence. Not because he agreed with her, but because he was afraid. I sat there for a long time, staring at nothing. The betrayal hit differently this time. Deeper. More personal. I had always wondered why he never defended me. Why he always looked away. Now I knew. They were all afraid of something. Margaret was afraid of losing control. Brittany was afraid of being ordinary. And Ronald. He was afraid of being exposed. Coward, I whispered to no one. That night I finalized the sequence of slides. Elena built a failsafe. Once the file opened, it would pull from the hidden folder and play video clips, emails, and that audio recording in order. We practiced it twice. She warned me. Once this goes live, there's no putting the genie back. I know. She paused, then handed me a USB. Just in case I get locked out. Or worse. I took it, closed my fist around it like a talisman. When she left, I sat alone in the dim room playing the audio one last time. My eyes never left the screen. I barely blinked. When it ended, I leaned back, exhaled slowly, and said aloud to the empty room. So even Dad chose silence. I didn't need to hurt them. I just needed them to see the truth they buried so carefully. Langford Towers was wrapped in silver and gold. The private elevator to the ballroom smelled of champagne and expensive cologne. Inside, the lighting was low and warm, and every round table was set like something out of a wedding magazine, glinting silverware, folded linen, long-stemmed glassware waiting to be filled. Laughter floated from the far end of the room. A live quartet was playing near the bar. I stood near the back as far from the action as possible, holding a half-empty glass of something I didn't order and didn't want. To the staff, I was just another guest. Not family. Certainly not a founder. Elena, in black slacks and a pressed collared shirt, wore a lanyard that said tech support, Langford Event Services. She gave me a subtle nod from the edge of the stage, then ducked behind a curtain. From there, she'd have access to the master console. She'd planted the file 2 hours earlier, named it something innocuous, intro, montage, final.mp4. It was time to autoplay 20 minutes into Margaret's keynote slideshow, embedded silent hidden, until it wasn't. I felt the countdown ticking inside me, but outside I smiled at the waitress offering canapes and declined politely. "Claire," a voice said behind me. I turned. Brittany. She was glowing eyeliner, sharp smile, bright heels, impossibly tall. She looked exactly how she wanted the world to see her: elegant, successful, irreplaceable. "I wasn't sure you'd come," she said, faux surprised. "I came," I said simply. "You said it was a family event." She tilted her head. "Right. Of course." No hug, no warmth, just a flicker of something in her eyes, calculating, wary. She walked away before I could say anything else, sweeping toward a small crowd gathered around Margaret, who was mid-story, about some deal she'd rescued from collapse. 5 minutes later, someone tapped a fork against a wine glass. The string quartet fell silent. Margaret stepped forward to the mic. "Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us to celebrate a year of tremendous growth. But more than business tonight is about something deeper: family." A modest applause. Brittany stood behind her arms folded, beaming. "Our family has always believed in building things together," Margaret continued, "through hard work, loyalty, and unity." The first slides rolled happy photos, company milestones, smiling executives, some candid shots of Brittany holding awards. No Claire, not even in the corners. I checked my phone. 2 minutes. Elena had texted me one word: ready. Then it happened. The slideshow froze for half a second, barely noticeable. The next slide blinked twice before switching, and the room stilled. On screen was a screenshot of the Whitmore Family Trust last modified date 6 months ago. Beneath it, a line item showing Claire Whitmore's name crossed out. A hush spread across the room. A few guests leaned forward. Then the next slide. An email header. From Margaret. Subject: Re-Trust Revision. Remove Claire body. Delete the girl from all benefits. She's been a burden since birth. Gasps rippled through the tables. Another slide, this time a snapshot of Claire's resignation form digitally signed by Brittany. Notes section: file her exit before the expansion. Keep her away from investors. Brittany's face drained of color. "What the hell is this?" someone whispered near me. Then a voice broke through, sharp and shrill. "Turn it off! Cut the damn feed!" It was Brittany. She stormed toward the AV desk, high heels clicking like gunshots against marble. "Who did this? Who uploaded this file?" Margaret tried to follow her expression, a strange twist of fury and panic. The crowd was no longer applauding. They were watching with uneasy fascination. Some were already filming. Brittany spun around, pointing at the staff. "Pull the plug, Tatman Hin. Now." And that's when I moved. I stood up, still holding the untouched glass, and walked slowly toward the center of the room. People parted without realizing it. Attention drawn to the only thing louder than Margaret's legacy: the silence that followed it. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. They saw it. All of them. The betrayal. The coldness. The truth. And I walked toward my family, no longer waiting to be invited to the table. Not anymore. I thought just revealing a sliver of the truth would be enough to make them stop. I was painfully naive. The morning after the gala, I walked into Whitmore and Langford's headquarters wearing the only thing I had left from my time there: a charcoal blazer, with the original company crest embroidered inside the cuff. A detail no one else would notice, but I would. The lobby had changed since I'd last stood here as a partner. Brighter now, colder. Digital kiosks had replaced the receptionist desk. The security guards gave me the kind of look reserved for either ex-employees or silent scandals. I signed in anyway. I wasn't here to beg. I was here to file a formal shareholder request to review ownership records, board meeting transcripts, and documents pertaining to the family trust. I had every right to them. On paper anyway. The front desk clerk took my folder with shaking hands and disappeared behind a frosted glass door. 10 minutes later, a different door opened. Brittany stepped out. Not a hair out of place. Not a smile on her face. Her voice was ice. "You thought that little stunt would shake me?" I didn't reply. "Let her talk. You humiliated mother in front of 40 investors." She went on, walking past me. "And you think that earns you a seat back at the table?" "I'm not asking for a seat," I said. "I'm asking for the truth. And my share." She stopped. Turned. "You gave that up when you walked out." "I was manipulated out," I said quietly. "And I intend to prove it." She smiled, that brittle kind of smile that fractures instead of softens. "Good luck," she said, walking away. But I wouldn't push her. "You've barely scratched the surface." Later that afternoon, I got the first official rejection request denied, security clearance level revoked. A one-line explanation stamped with the new firm's insignia. Margaret hadn't just denied my request, she'd changed the locks. And she wasn't hiding anymore. At 6:22 p.m. my phone rang. I didn't need to check the screen. "From now on," Margaret said, her voice flat, "I will not be extending any more courtesies." "Was what you wrote true?" I asked. "That I was a burden since birth?" There was silence. "Watch your next move carefully, Claire," she said. "You might find this game more expensive than you anticipated." Then she hung up. The next morning, I got served a legal notice. Whitmore and Langford, represented by the firm Abernathy and Rowe, was filing a countersuit, unauthorized access of proprietary systems, internal disruption, malicious interference with fiduciary operations. In other words, they were suing me for leaking my own erasure. I stood in my kitchen barefoot, staring at the pages. They'd weaponized the very system that had silenced me. Internal disruption, that was the term they used for a daughter revealing her mother's betrayal. My phone buzzed. Elena. She didn't text. She sent a secure link with no message, just a file name. "Play thisnow.move." I clicked. Elena's voice whispered in the background. This footage was captured 2 weeks before the trust revision. The screen showed a high-angle security camera inside a conference room. Margaret. Brittany. The family's new lawyer. The audio wasn't perfect, but it was clear enough. "Margaret. We have to be careful with this. If Claire pushes back, lawyer will need justification. Documented non-performance or breach. Brittany. She's got nothing, but if she tries, we flip it, say she accessed the server without clearance. Margaret. Good. Then we can frame it as an internal threat. It'll hold in court." The clip ended. I just sat there. They'd premeditated the entire thing, even before I knew what they were doing. My phone buzzed again. "Elena, you needed to see it. Now we move." The war had begun, and this time my mother wasn't hiding behind lawyers or polite facades. She was in it, out in the open, in that video. My father said Claire will never forgive me, but at the very least I have to leave behind the truth. The cursor blinked over the file name for a long time before I could press play. Final, trust, record.move duration. 17 minutes password provided by Elena. She didn't say where she'd found it, only that I needed to watch it alone. The moment it began, I knew it wasn't meant to be seen by the public or even the family. The lighting was dim, casting uneven shadows across Ronald's face. He sat behind his desk in what used to be his private study, the one I'd rarely entered as a child. A place filled with old cigars, dark leather, and a smell that clung to secrets. Now it held his last confession. He looked older than I remembered. Not just older, diminished. Like he'd been hollowed out by silence. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted the webcam. I don't know how else to say this. He began, voice hoarse, eyes darting away from the lens. I've made choices. Cowardly ones. I didn't move. I hardly breathed. I let your mother rewrite the truth, he continued. She said it was best for the company, best for the legacy. But deep down, I knew. It was just revenge. Revenge for something I did long ago, and something she never let go. He took a shaky breath. Margaret has had documents. Proof. An affair I had before Brittany was born. She found out years later but never confronted me outright. She waited until she could use it. The camera shook slightly as he shifted. When the board started talking about revising the trust, she said I had two options. Sign the amendment removing you, Claire. Or she'd leak everything. Destroy my reputation. Drag me through a divorce that would bleed me dry and humiliate everyone attached to my name. His hands clenched into fists on the desk. She told me you were too soft, that you were never a real contender, that you wouldn't fight back. And I believed her, God help me. I believed her. I closed my eyes for a moment. In the background, I could hear a faint clock ticking, as if time itself was counting down his shame. I didn't want to erase you, he said, quieter now. I fought her at first. But Margaret, she plans 5 moves ahead. She knew every pressure point, every crack in me. Then a pause. A long one. And yet, I couldn't live with it. I couldn't live with what we were doing to you. He reached into a drawer and pulled out a small folder, held it up to the camera. This is a trust I created without her knowledge. It's not under Whitmore and Langford. It's held in a shell foundation in Delaware, traceable only if someone knew where to look. It's not much, not compared to what you were owed, but it's something. My breath caught. He placed the folder down, tapped the top gently. You're the only one I ever felt saw me, not just the job title or the money, just me. And I failed you more deeply than I'll ever be able to explain. Tears burned behind my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. Not yet. Then came the moment that shattered everything. Ronald leaned forward, eyes finally locking with the camera. Claire, if you found this video, then I'm already gone. The screen didn't flicker. The audio didn't glitch. There was no drama, no storm outside the window. Just stillness. And the weight of words that could never be unsaid. I'm sorry, he whispered. The video ended. I stared at the black screen for several long seconds, then slowly stood. Outside the window, the city looked the same, indifferent. But inside me, something shifted. For years, I'd held Ronald in a box labeled complicit. I thought his silence meant consent. But now I understood his silence had been soaked in guilt and fear, and ultimately, love twisted by cowardice. I picked up my phone. Elena, I said when she answered, we need to locate that trust. And then we take the rest back too. I no longer wanted just revenge. I wanted to restore what he tried to salvage. They want to put me in jail. Then I'll start with the law. I hadn't been in a law office since I dropped out nearly 20 years ago, a decision made under pressure, not choice. Ronald needed help managing the transition phase of the company. Brittany was swamped in college, and Margaret was too focused on image building to care. So I deferred my second semester, then a year, then never went back. But some skills never really die. The conference room was glass-walled, lined with silent books and cooler air than I expected. Diana Moore tapped her pen against the table as she reviewed the court summons. I'd reached out to her late the night before. She didn't hesitate. They want to accuse you of unlawful system access, she said calmly. Ironically, their case is too polished, too fast. It looks manufactured. I need to strike back, I said. Not emotionally, not recklessly, but clean. Diana nodded. Then we file a counterclaim. She leaned forward and pushed the paper toward me. And this is how we start request for full disclosure of trust amendments and shareholder transfers. They'll be legally obligated to present both the original and modified versions. I glanced down at the packet. It looked like any other motion, but to me it was a doorway. And she added, "We attach this." She pulled out a transcript. Ronald's confession, the video Elena recovered, now certified and time-stamped. I exhaled. By the time I left the office that afternoon, Diana had filed the first motion with the clerk. We had formally requested restoration of my 15% equity as co-founder, citing Ronald's last willful declaration. Elena, in turn, compiled metadata trails to prove Margaret's unauthorized interference in the transition. The following morning, chaos hit the Whitmore and Langford boardroom. Elena messaged me in clipped sentences: emergency shareholder meeting, agenda reassignment of disputed shares, Margaret present, Brittany leading. It was the first sign of fracture. For decades, they moved like a unit: cold, efficient maternal dominance paired with calculated loyalty. But now they were moving too fast, stepping over procedural rules they once flaunted with elegance. In Diana's office, we mapped out the next steps. "We can issue a subpoena," she said, clicking through court records. "But it's better to let them panic. They'll make mistakes. What if they already sold the shares I asked? They haven't. Not yet. Legally, your stake is frozen under dispute. And if they try," Diana's eyes lit up with sharp precision, "then we prove intentional obstruction. That's criminal liability." It was strange sitting across from someone who once interned beside me in an ethics seminar, now turning corporate warfare into structured art. I didn't feel powerful, but I felt right, aligned with something I had abandoned long ago. Later that evening, Elena buzzed me again. "They've started changing the registry." Attached was a photo of the updated ownership ledger, digital, clean, damning. Next to the entry for my 15% stake was a new designation: transferee Benjamin Keller, external consultant. "Who the hell is Benjamin Keller?" I muttered. Elena's message came immediately after. "Never heard of him. But I'm digging." I stared at the name. It wasn't just the theft that burned. It was the arrogance that they could invent a phantom owner, launder my legacy through someone nameless, faceless, soulless. Diana's words from earlier echoed in my head. "They're scared. That's the best signal you could hope for." I didn't want to be hopeful. I wanted to corner them so tightly that their next lie would strangle itself. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. The legal path would be slow, but it was solid. And for the first time, I had allies with more than just empathy. They had teeth. I sent one message to Elena Track Keller. Bank contracts, family, past clients. Everything. And then I turned back to the motion brief. Let them file lawsuits. Let them forge new names. They were building their defense out of sand. And I had the tide. The name of that third party was Brittany's ex-boyfriend, Michael Reyes. The name hit like a glass of ice water to the face. Not because I hadn't heard it before, but because I hadn't heard it in years, not since Brittany's wild phase when she briefly dated someone Ronald had openly despised. I remembered the shouting match. Dad called him a liability in a good suit, and Brittany called Ronald a coward hiding behind ties. Now here he was again. Except this time, he wasn't just a fling. He was holding my birthright. Elena had tracked the name from the corporate registry to a holding firm in Delaware. The firm was tied to a condo in Miami. The condo was leased to a name I recognized: Reyes M. I booked a flight the same afternoon. We met at a bar inside the Fairmont late in the evening. He wore a white shirt, the top buttons undone, and that same sleek smirk he used to flash in old photos. But there was something else in his eyes now. Something tighter. Nervous, maybe. Or tired. "You came alone?" he asked, glancing around. "You expected the FBI?" He let out a dry laugh. "No. Just expected you to be more like your sister." I'm not. He sipped his drink, then leaned back. Then let's not pretend. I didn't speak. I wanted him to fill the silence. And he did. Brittany offered me a cut, he said plainly. She knew I had old LLCs she could use to transfer shares under the radar. She needed someone untraceable, but legally clean. So you're a ghost with a notary stamp. She said you'd never fight back. Said you'd probably move to Oregon and knit scarves. I didn't flinch. And you believed her. He hesitated. At first. I watched him closely. What changed? Michael looked away for the first time. I saw Ronald's trust document. Not the public one, the original one. He never removed your name. Not officially. My fingers tightened around the glass. She had a draft prepared, he continued. It looked like Ronald signed it, but the timestamp metadata was off, and the signature page had a mismatch. She never thought I'd look that closely. Why are you telling me this? Because I'm not suicidal. That gave me pause. She's starting to lose it, Michael said. She thinks someone inside is feeding you intel. And if she finds out it's me, well, let's just say, Brittany's loyalty is for sale, but her wrath is free. I reached into my bag and slid over a tiny recording device. I need her voice. I need her intent. Not assumptions. He hesitated, then nodded. I can get it. But you'll need to cover me if this goes sideways. That night, Elena arranged surveillance our contact in Miami would tail Brittany and Michael's meetup. A hotel rooftop. Just like her. Drama with a view. Hours ticked by until finally a file popped into my inbox. Audio. Labeled simply, "B meeting confirmation." I pressed play. Michael's voice was steady. Calm. Then Brittany's breezy, too, rehearsed. She's not smart like you, baby, she said, laughter in her tone. She's only just now learning how to fight. It hit me in the gut. Not because it was cruel, but because it was true. For most of my life, I hadn't fought. I'd adapted, endured, withdrawn. That had made me easy to dismiss. But not anymore. The next message from Michael wasn't audio, it was a text. She's starting to suspect. Someone tipped her off. She's watching me. I stared at the screen. Brittany was clever, surgical, emotionally ruthless, but she was also impatient. And paranoia was the first crack in her perfect glass surface. She could sense the war shifting. And this time, she wasn't holding the high ground alone. I used to want fairness. Now I want the truth. All of it. I sat across from Diana Moore in her downtown office, the late afternoon sun slicing across the heavy blinds. The room was lined with thick legal books and whiteboards scribbled with timelines and names. Diana tapped a pen rhythmically against her notepad, while I placed the USB drive on the table. This is the recording, I said. From Michael. Brittany confirmed she orchestrated the asset transfers. She knew I had a legal stake. She admitted to it. Diana looked at the drive, then at me. You realize what this means? She asked. Yes. It means we stop playing defense. She plugged it into her laptop. The tinny speakers crackled to life. Brittany's voice rang out clear and smug. She's not smart like you, baby. She's only just now learning how to fight. Diana paused the recording. That's not just an insult, that's intent. And under current corporate litigation standards, intent tied to asset manipulation is useful. Useful enough to stop them, I asked. Useful enough to start stopping them. She stood and paced toward the large board behind her desk, where we had pinned the entire family web Margaret at the top, Brittany beneath her, and a cluster of shell entities and trust accounts sprawling outward. My name was a lonely node once dangling at the edge, now moving steadily inward with every thread of proof. Diana made a few calls. Elena pulled up a new file. Margaret had just initiated a bulk transfer of the Founders Holdings account into a Luxembourg-based fund. It was a quiet heist masked as strategic diversification, but we both knew the timing was no coincidence. She's trying to liquidate before we can tie her to any fraud, Diana muttered. We need to freeze everything. Today. Within the hour, we had a petition submitted to the court motion for emergency injunction against all transfers involving the Whitmore Family Trust. Diana invoked RICO precedents, SEC compliance codes, and whistleblower protections. She knew this game and she knew how to rattle it at the foundation. Elena handed me another update. Michael had gone dark. His last message was brief. She suspects. She's cleaning house. Be careful. I didn't reply. Instead, I stared at the mural of our case now mapped across the wall. It was more than evidence, it was my family dissected and exposed like a corpse on a cold slab. Margaret's strategies, Brittany's betrayals, Ronald's silence, even mine, my years of looking the other way, letting their dominance parade as unity. No more. I looked at Diana. If we file with the SEC, we bring federal eyes. We bring attention they can't buy off. She gave a single nod. I've already started the draft. You're listed as a cooperating witness. And if this holds, you'll be the plaintiff with controlling interest. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt still, grounded, like my bones had settled into the weight of something unmovable. This wasn't revenge. This was returning what was stolen. Not just the legacy, but the story, the truth. Diana made the call. The line rang longer than expected, then clicked. This is Special Agent Harper with the Securities and Exchange Commission. This is Diana Moore representing Claire Whitmore. We have a whistleblower claim involving a multi-generational trust offshore transfers and alleged misappropriation of corporate inheritance. There was a pause. Understood. We've had some preliminary signals on your subjects already. If your client's ready, we'd like her to testify. Diana handed me the phone. I pressed it to my ear. This is Claire. Miss Whitmore, the agent, said, his tone steady, clinical. We'd like to formally invite you to give a statement. In person. There are sealed documents that need corroboration. Are you available within the next 24 hours? I looked out the window. The sky outside was overcast, the city below dull and gray, but I felt no gloom. For the first time in years, I felt like I was standing in the right timeline, one I chose. I turned back to Diana and nodded. It's time, I said. I'm ready to tell everything. From the beginning. I walked into the SEC hearing room as a witness, but the way they looked at me, you'd think I was the one on trial. The air was crisp with air conditioning and judgment. The walls were gray, the light too sterile. It wasn't a courtroom, not yet, but it had the same chill. People from both sides of the aisle filled the seats, corporate auditors, lawyers, investigators. On one side of the long conference table sat Diana and me. Across from us, Margaret and Brittany, flanked by a team of suits, whose job was to pretend all this was beneath them. I noticed the subtle tension even before the session began. Brittany leaned into her mother's ear more than once, whispering urgently. Margaret barely responded. Her jaw was stone. Her pearl earrings caught the light every time she turned away from her daughter. The investigator entered. Middle-aged ex-military in posture, government in patience. His name was Agent Harper, and he began without ceremony. Miss Whitmore, you submitted a whistleblower complaint with supporting evidence. We're here to verify its legitimacy. Diana gestured toward the USB we brought. We've compiled documents, digital files, and recordings, including a direct video confession from Mr. Ronald Whitmore dated 2 months before his death. They played the clip. Ronald's voice crackled through the speakers. His eyes avoided the camera. I never wanted Claire out of the company. Margaret. She used things I thought I'd buried. And I let her. If you're watching this, Claire, I'm sorry. I didn't blink. Margaret did. Then came the audio, Brittany's voice, soft and vicious. She's not smart like you, baby. She's only now learning how to fight. Michael's voice followed, questioning her. Silence, then a chuckle. She'll lose, Brittany said. The room shifted. Chairs creaked. Someone coughed nervously. Margaret didn't wait. "This is fiction," she said, folding her hands. "Fabricated by a disgruntled relative with a history of mental fragility. Claire has always been unstable." That hit harder than I expected. But Diana was ready. "We have Ronald Whitmore's biometric signature," she said calmly, opening another file. "Fingerprint verification, encrypted ID stamp, and time-based metadata. This is the original file. Not altered, not edited, and not unstable." Harper nodded. "Can we verify that with our tech team?" "You may," Diana replied. "We welcome it." Margaret gave a tight smile. Even if it's real, he was under stress, not in sound mind. That's when Diana opened the chain of share transfers. The room dimmed as the projector displayed dates, times, recipient entities. Every transfer that excluded Claire occurred immediately after communication between these two emails, Margaret's private account and a financial handler in Luxembourg. Brittany's eyes darted to the screen, her knee jittered under the table. Then Diana pounced. "And here, Brittany authorizes an emergency transfer to an entity named Black Wren Holdings, whose registration ties back to her ex-partner Michael Reyes. She even used company credentials for clearance. That's asset misrepresentation. I was instructed to do so by the board," Brittany said too quickly. "There was no board vote," Diana said coldly. Harper looked up. "Miss Whitmore," he said, addressing me directly. "Do you believe these transfers were designed to deliberately strip you of your legal inheritance and founding stake?" I looked across the table straight at Margaret. "You didn't lose a daughter," I said quietly. "You sold her." A hush fell. Brittany visibly recoiled. Margaret blinked, then smiled like ice. "You should pray I don't lose everything, Claire," she said, voice low and vicious. "Because if I do, I'll have nothing left to be afraid of." I met her stare and said nothing. But deep down I understood what she meant. She wasn't warning me. She was promising something. And the real storm hadn't even started. I always thought my father was weak. But when I opened that old notebook, I realized what he had really given up was himself. It came wrapped in a faded canvas pouch handed to me by a man in his 60s outside the SEC building. He introduced himself as Alan Greeley, one of Ronald's former assistants apparently, the only one he still trusted. "Your father left this for you," Alan said softly. "Told me to wait well, until yesterday happened." The notebook was leather-bound, cracked along the spine edges, worn to a fuzz. I recognized it immediately. That notebook had lived in Ronald's desk drawer for as long as I could remember, always locked, always off limits. Once as a teenager, I asked him what was inside. He smiled, distant, tired. "Things I haven't figured out yet." I opened it now, hands trembling. Inside were decades of thoughts, scrawled notes sometimes barely legible, doodles, dates, private shorthand I could only guess at. But the pages unfolded like peeling wallpaper, revealing a man I had never been allowed to see. At first, the entries were mundane business worries, staff gripes, reminders to call clients. But then the tone shifted. "Margaret wants control. Always has. I used to admire it. Now it scares me." Another page dated 15 years ago. Claire asked today why I didn't stand up for her in front of the board. I told her it wasn't the right time. Truth is, I froze. Margaret said if I back her again, she'll destroy me. And I believe her. The ink was smudged. I wasn't sure if it had faded over time or if he'd been crying. There were entries about me. "She's the best thing I've done. Not perfect, but honest. Smarter than she knows. If I had half her clarity, I wouldn't be hiding behind conference tables. And this, I wanted to teach her how to fight. But I was afraid she'd fight me too." I felt something in my throat tighten. There were signs of his small rebellions, anonymous donations in my name to legal charities, secret calls to colleagues trying to delay certain board votes. even notes where he'd questioned whether the lawyers Margaret hired were acting outside the firm's ethics. He didn't stop her, but he didn't always enable her either. Then came the last page. Just 5 words in handwriting far shakier than the rest. If you're reading this, good. Beneath that one line, if you can still feel love. Claire, I haven't completely failed. I didn't realize I was crying until the ink blurred under my fingers. It wasn't anger this time. It wasn't bitterness. It was the grief of meeting a version of my father I'd never known and would never get the chance to talk to. For the first time in years, I wished I could have a conversation, not a confrontation. I wished he could see me now, not as someone he failed to protect, but as the woman who was finally protecting herself. The silence in the room grew heavy. Diana had left to file motions. Elena was in the kitchen muttering to herself on a call. I sat alone with that notebook, each word echoing louder than any accusation Margaret had ever thrown at me. It was strange how freeing forgiveness could be, especially when the person you forgave was already gone. But just as I began to close the book, my phone buzzed. Elena's voice came through low and urgent. Claire, they're moving. I wiped my face. What? They've started a media campaign. Margaret just gave an interview to the Financial Mirror. She called you a disgruntled, illegitimate heir, said Ronald was mentally unfit. And Brittany just posted something even worse. The air snapped back into tension. Elena's voice trembled now. They're hitting back. Hard. I glanced at the notebook one more time, then stood. Good, I whispered, because the fight wasn't over. But now at last I wasn't fighting a ghost. I was finally ready to face the living. I thought they would hit me with lawsuits. Turns out, they chose something dirtier. It started with a single tweet, anonymous, vague, but loaded. You think legacy kids don't steal? Look closer at the Whitmore heiress. Cash audit Claire. Within hours, the tag trended on a niche financial gossip forum, then exploded onto mainstream social platforms. Photoshopped images of me in front of luxury cars I didn't own. Blurry screenshots claiming I had siphoned money from company accounts. Edited audio suggesting I'd once had a mental breakdown at a shareholder meeting, something that never even happened. Then came the blogs. Disowned daughter or corporate saboteur sources. Say Claire Whitmore had episodes. Was Ronald covering up who really inherited the Whitmore fortune? Maybe not the one you think. It was coordinated, slick, relentless. Elena burst into my apartment the next morning with a phone in one hand and a steaming coffee in the other, her face pale. They've turned the internet into a courtroom. And you're losing. I didn't flinch. Not this time. Diana was already digging. She traced several of the anonymous posts to a private IP linked to one of Brittany's executive assistants. Another fake source turned out to be a social media account created just 2 weeks ago with activity that lined up suspiciously well with Margaret's new PR firm. Classic distraction tactic, Diana muttered, thumbing through legal precedents. Smear your opponent until truth drowns in noise. But I didn't want to drown. I wanted to rise above. So I didn't fire back. No countersuits, no public denials, no flashy interviews. Instead, I sat down and wrote real letters, handwritten with shaky ink and raw truth. To my former mentor at the law firm I left, to 2 of Ronald's oldest friends on the board, to an intern I once coached through a panic attack in the break room, to the professor who believed in me when I dropped out to care for my family. No victim theatrics, no bitterness. Just what happened. How I got erased, and why I was still standing. I mailed 27 letters in total. And then I waited. 3 days later, Elena forwarded me a link. You need to see this. It was from the Post-Ledger, an independent investigative site. Inside, a family of lies, the daughter they tried to erase. The byline read, Lana Reese contributor. I remembered her. She was one of the few journalists who used to cover corporate governance without chasing clicks. Apparently, one of my letters had reached her. The article was brutal, but not about me. It laid out the timeline of events: Margaret's silent coup, the secret transfer of shares, Ronald's suppressed testimony, and Brittany's alleged involvement in offshore accounts. It included screenshots of the real diatribes against me, juxtaposed with evidence they were coordinated attacks. But what struck me hardest was the closing paragraph. Claire Whitmore may not have Ronald's name on a plaque or her face in glossy family photos, but perhaps integrity is the real inheritance, and some things can't be bought or buried. The article caught fire. Suddenly, I wasn't the unstable daughter anymore. I was the one who hadn't fought back with poison but with principle. I was still processing that when I got Elena's next text. Photo: Brittany slamming her hands on a conference table, face red with fury. The caption under it: "She played us." With the truth, I could almost hear her voice. Margaret standing still in the background, ice cold. Her words were reported as clipped and lethal. Then it's time for the final game. And I knew what that meant. They weren't done. But neither was I. The courtroom was silent. Not the kind of silence that comes from boredom or routine, but the breathless stillness of people who've just witnessed something shift. Something irreversible. Something true. I stood alone, dressed in black. Not out of mourning, but respect for myself, for my father, for the parts of me I had nearly buried to keep this family afloat. Behind me, Elena sat with her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were pale. Diana beside her didn't speak a word. She didn't need to. Up front, the judge flipped through pages with mechanical precision. The room waited. Cameras were banned, phones silenced, but I felt the weight of hundreds of invisible eyes watching, waiting to see if the girl they once called unstable would finally fall or rise. Then the judge looked up. "The court has reviewed the evidence submitted, including the digital audio file, corroborated testimony, and original estate documents previously withheld. The recording is deemed admissible under federal statute." I didn't breathe. Per the testimony of Michael Reyes and confirmed through additional forensic accounting, the court finds a deliberate attempt to obscure legal inheritance protocols. He continued, "The previously submitted will dated October 12, 2021, signed and electronically fingerprinted by Ronald Whitmore, is restored as the active legal testament. Claire Whitmore is recognized as a legal co-founder and beneficiary of Whitmore Dynamics." I heard Diana exhale. "The court is ordering a formal investigation into Margaret Whitmore for potential charges of financial fraud, willful misrepresentation of estate holdings, and unlawful transfer of assets across international borders." There was a slight rustle from the bench to my left. Margaret didn't flinch, her hands folded chin high, but her eyes, they weren't focused on the judge, they were on me. Effective immediately, the judge went on, "Brittany Whitmore is suspended from all executive duties pending the outcome of the secondary hearing. SEC involvement is authorized. Federal agents will coordinate further investigation." A brief silence returned. Not a single gasp, not a single cheer. Just the weight of finality sinking in. And yet, as I stood there, I felt no triumph, only clarity. I had imagined this moment 100 times, winning back what was stolen, seeing them held accountable. But now, standing in it, I realized it wasn't about revenge. It was about restoring what had been silenced. I stepped down from the witness podium. Every step felt heavy and hollow, like walking away from a battlefield where the war was won, but the soil would never forget the blood. As I passed the seats behind the bar, Elena reached out. Her fingertips brushed my hand, but I didn't stop. I kept walking until I reached the courthouse doors. There, under the shadow of a government seal, I pulled out the letter my father left for me. The one I hadn't dared open again since that night. I didn't open it this time either. I just held it tighter. Outside press swarmed. But they didn't see me. Not really. They saw a story, a spectacle, a scandal wrapped in family drama and legal precedent. I was a headline now. But inside me, everything had gone quiet. Behind me, as the courtroom emptied, Margaret sat alone on the bench. She didn't rise, didn't speak to the attorneys flanking her. Only later would I hear what one court reporter overheard as he walked by her. She had whispered it so softly it barely registered. "That girl is me." But she never let the world twist her into something else. And in that moment, I knew the battle was over. But the reckoning was still unfolding. I didn't seek revenge. I just wanted everything, everyone back where they belonged. That included me. The invitation came in a neat envelope with a new company letterhead and Elena's signature at the bottom. It offered a clean return board seat, co-founder title, reinstated full honors, even back pay. But I read it once, then set it aside. I didn't need my name engraved on a plaque to know it had never truly been erased. Instead, I asked Elena to take the seat. "Make something better than what they tried to protect," I wrote. She didn't argue. In her reply, she wrote only, "It's yours when you're ready. Until then, I'll make you proud." I didn't tell anyone where I was going. Just a map saved on my phone. A beach tucked along the northern coast, one my father had taken me to when I was 7. I remembered the way the water shimmered at sunset, how he taught me to skip stones and said, "Claire, the trick isn't strength, it's angle." I hadn't understood then. I do now. I rented a small cottage overlooking the dunes. No Wi-Fi, no reporters, just silence. And for the first time in years, I welcomed it. One morning, I opened the safe I'd brought with me. Inside, neatly folded, was the original will, the one they tried to hide, rewrite Barry under signatures and schemes. I didn't need it anymore, but I couldn't throw it away. So I wrapped it in cloth, sealed it in a fireproof envelope, and placed it back in the safe. Not as ammunition, just as a reminder. Then I opened my laptop. There was one unread message. It was from Brittany. Short. No subject line. "You won, but you lost me forever." I stared at it for a long while. No anger rose. No satisfaction. Only a quiet ache for the sister I had once braided hair with, stayed up late whispering to, and lost to ambition. I replied with an attachment, a scanned copy of the will. No note. She would understand the meaning. This wasn't a threat. It wasn't a warning. It was memory set in ink. In the late hours, I walked along the shoreline, barefoot, wind pushing against my collar. The sky above was streaked with stars, the sea dark and endless. And in that vastness, I found myself small, but not broken. I stood with the envelope in hand. I could have torn it, could have let the ocean have it, but I didn't. Instead, I whispered into the wind. Sometimes justice doesn't need an audience. It just needs someone brave enough to keep it in place. I turned back toward the cottage. The sand shifted beneath my steps, but I walked steady. No applause followed. No cameras clicked. No one watched. But I knew. For the first time in my life, I wasn't chasing approval or demanding space. I had created it and filled it. I stepped forward. Alone. But at last, entirely myself. I didn't win by shouting louder or striking first. I won because I never stopped believing that truth, when placed in the right hands, can outlast any lie. There were moments I was erased, buried, humiliated, but not broken. Like a final chord of a long-forgotten melody, justice may arrive late, but once it's heard, it echoes forever. No wall of lies can stand forever against the tide of truth. If you felt this journey hit close to home, like, share and subscribe, and comment your thoughts below. Type 1 if you've ever had to fight back against injustice. Type 2 if you think the ending still left something unresolved.